Number of political things going on in the world, and we may have a guest joining us later on as well. But let me see what's happening and share what's going on as well. And like I said, we'll see who joins us and what conversation points they've got. And I think Paul Zetz may be joining us as well. And I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly and all along those lines. But Lebanon says that 22 have been killed and 117 wounded in the fresh Israeli strikes on central Beirut, and the world is reacting to an alleged Israeli attack on UN peacekeepers in Lebanon. So that is something that is going on the political landscape on the world and all along those lines. So definitely that is something that is folks are paying attention to and all along those lines. And Turkey is mulling talks with the Kurds amid fears of an Israeli strike on Iran. So definitely that is something else going on as well. And Ratan Tata is cremated with full state honors in Mumbai. So France lost a dear friend from India, according to the French President Macron, who controls folks about Ratan Tata's death. So definitely that's something that folks will be paying attention to as well. And definitely a lot of other things are going on in the world as the Kremlin is refuting Trump's denial on sending Putin COVID testing equipment. And Bob Wood's book is out and is capturing definitely some of the alliances between Trump and Putin and all along those lines. So it'll be interesting to see what folks have to say about that as well. And another town in Haiti has come under attack a week after gangs killed at least 115 people. And Taiwan celebrated National Day amid tensions with Taiwan. So that's just some of the things that are going on in the political landscape and all along those lines. So we're going to see what other folks have got to say and what's going on in their mind and what they're doing as well. So definitely, I've got Dr. Paul Zetz with me, and I'm glad to have him here as a guest. I've also got Sasha Starr, and we'll be bringing him in, and we'll see if any of our other panelists join. But Dr. Zetz, glad that you were able to join us, and you are the author of Revolutionary Optimism. I did get a copy of the book, and you've got these 7 principles that folks should be doing if they're into activism and all along those lines. And I know a lot of people are thinking about activism and activism space with all the conflicts that are going on in the world and all along those lines. So if you could just share a little bit about yourself and that particular book, and we'll get into some conversation. And like I said, Sasha may join us as well, and we'll see if other people join us also. But I'd love to hear more about this powerful book. And you've just done some amazing work in general, because I was reading about you. You're a physician, epidemiologist, and award-winning advocate for global justice and human rights. And I also understand that you're the former executive director of the Global AIDS Alliance and worked as the director Data Revolution for Sustainable Development in the Office of the Global AIDS Coordinator. So I know a lot of people have been worried about COVID, and that's the major health concern right now. But we do know that AIDS has been around, and it's still around, and it's still a issue for a number of folks. But I just wondered if you could share a little bit about yourself and what got you involved in all of these kind of spaces.
Hey, Mark. Good to see you again. I've been on your show, and I'm glad to be back. Yeah. So, Revolutionary Optimism is a newly published book. It's a handbook. It's 7 steps for living as a love-centered activist. And I felt like I had an opportunity to share some best practices, some inspirational stories from around the world, and wisdom from movement-building leaders about how to live as an activist, a love-centered activist. And the first half of the book is really focused on our journey, our own personal journeys of identifying our soul's purpose and our own journey of self-liberation and self-realization. Then the middle of the book is really about peace crafting. It's about how do we relate to other people in whatever we're doing. And then the last half of the book is about our collective liberation. How do we build movements? How do we prepare for peaceful revolutionary opportunities when we can make a big leap forward for humanity? And I think that we're living in very interesting times, right? There's a lot of challenges happening all at the same time. Our democracy is collapsing, our economic crisis, our climate emergency, all these things are happening together. And so I believe we're approaching a moment or a phase where we can actually transform into a better path forward.
That makes a lot of sense. And how do you feel that we are doing in the sense of people finding their purpose. Ironically, I was on a social work wealth conference earlier today. I was one of the lead online producers for that and everything, and it's a 2-day conference. But that was exactly what the keynote speaker on day one was talking about, with this notion of finding your purpose and finding your gift. So I was wondering your thoughts on that. Is that is part of your book as well?
Yeah, that's in step one. And step two, it's around like understanding that you can quest, that you can search for what that is. It may not be apparent right away. And that's part of the game of life, is to experiment and explore, like, what excites me and what do I feel called to? What are my gifts and what is my passion? And it's very important to give people the language that it is an opportunity and a pursuit that you can do throughout your life. And I also share in my book the whole concept of shape-shifting. Like, I might think that this is my purpose right now, but I have sovereignty and agency to shapeshift, like determine that there might be a different path or another way that I can express myself or live my life. And so I think a lot of people get trapped in a box of, like, I have to do this or I have to do that. I've seen so many people live their whole lives in situations where they feel stuck, where they feel like they're not fulfilling their soul's purpose. They're just doing what they have to do. And I offer a different way, a different opportunity of thinking about how we can live life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And one of the other terms that I've heard described with you and others as well, and there's a number of people that are protesting various injustices around the world, but you talk about being a love-centered activist. So what does a love-centered activist mean to you and everything, and how does that play into the kind of divisive society that we're living in today, particularly here in the United States, but around the world as well?
Yeah, so I've lived and worked around the world, and I have found that love is like the universal connecting force that connects humanity. I think everywhere I've gone, people, men and women and children and elderly people, they all connect through family and friends and community with a sense of love. And so I feel like it's okay to say it because it exists, and to acknowledge it and to honor it. And then it's like, I asked the question in the book about how can I serve today? And I say that every love-centered action counts. And that includes action that I might take for myself, like self-love or caring for myself, working out or eating right or going for a massage or whatever I might get to do. Or if I'm caring for a family member or a loved one, helping them out in a time of need. Or on a daily basis, being a parent or a grandparent or whatever. Yeah. And then serving the broader community, and then serving the broader country and world. So every love-centered action counts. I actually think that 99% of people are already love-centered activists. They may not see themselves that way or use that language, but I think people that are living a life of love, walking the path of love with the people around them, is all counts as love-centered activism.
Before I bring in the other panelists and everything along those lines, how does it play into the various conflicts that are going on around the world? I mean, everybody these days is talking about Ukraine, talking about what's going on in the Middle East, but there are a number of other conflicts that are around the world as well. So I just wondering, how does your work and how does this kind of like passion of yours play into possibly even finding solutions into these very deep conflicts that are going on?
That's a great question, because I think the situation, the reality that we face on a daily basis can put me personally in a place of despair or anxiety or a sense of hopelessness. And that is actually why I wrote this book, because I realized that I have to generate myself every day as a revolutionary optimist in the face of circumstances. And so, like, the Israel-Palestine conflict has been a big trauma that I and many other people are witnessing and living through. And like, I have to say that I believe peace is possible. I believe that a peaceful coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians is possible. and I have to like commit to working on that and being in solidarity with people that are aiming for that same kind of direction, honoring all human life, honoring all people with dignity. It's not easy work, and it kind of feels like it might be hopeless today. But I believe there's so many people working towards that common dream that we should connect with each other and build a movement, a solidarity movement, and that is happening right now in a way that is unprecedented in terms of global solidarity for the Palestinian liberation movement, for example. It's never been so vibrant. And I believe that creates a possibility for the pathway for peace.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Everything. Before I bring in some of the other folks and all along those lines, like I said earlier, but some of your other work in the day was around AIDS research and all along those lines. So I just wondered if you could speak to that, because I think a lot of times when one disease overweighs the other or becomes more in the eye of the people, and we just got out of, supposedly we are more out of COVID than we had been in the past and everything, but it kind of like overrode and people don't pay as much attention to AIDS, even though AIDS is still out there. But you are very active in the AIDS struggle, and I know there's still people dying of AIDS around the world. But I was just wondering your take on the AIDS struggle.
Yeah, HIV/AIDS is a virus that is still spreading around the world. We know that it is a virus that spreads human to human mostly, but it's also a virus that is predominantly related to our social well-being. So economically disadvantaged people, people of color, and females in particular are at higher risk, both here in the United States and globally, for getting HIV infection. And so it's that intersectional, it's the systems that we have created that allow that kind of health, that inequality to persist, to allow certain people to be more at risk than others. And so we have the medicines to treat HIV. We have life-saving AIDS medicines. They should be made universally available, and that was the work that I did.
Yeah. Just really quickly, I did bring in Rick as well, everything. But one of the things I was going to mention before bringing in Sasha and Jacoby as well is that I know that one of the things that we get divided on is around race and class, but also around smartness or lack thereof. I mentioned earlier that some people are proud of whatever their gift is, and am friends with or acquaintances with a guy named Bruce George, who talks about genius is common, which is this notion that we all have a genius of one sort or another, and it's just a matter of discovering what your personal genius is. But I know that both you and Rick are part of that kind of like class of folks that are seen as the brain geniuses of the world, and sometimes that can be a dividing factor and everything. But I just wanted y'all to take
I think it's weird to be genius, it's weird to be proud of something like that, because it's just a genetic accident. It's not like my skill at answering problems in IQ tests is A, it's a trivial skill, and B, I didn't get that skill by doing push-ups. But you mentioned at the top of the show, Dr. Zeitz mentioned a ton of reasons to be nervous or despairing, and I wrote down a few reasons they go both ways. Like AI, it wasn't on your list, but AI can go either way. It can save us or it can kill us. One thing that is a good thing is the drop in the rate of human population increase. Because a lot of the things on the list are because we have a ton of people on Earth, 8 billion, but the deal is that 25% of the countries on Earth have a declining population. And in 20 years, that's going to be 75%. And there are a bunch of reasons, including social media, including people feeling like they don't want to bring kids into the world. But the deal is that we're supposed hold on, that we reach peak humanity, the greatest population on Earth, has been revised sooner to 2060 from 2100, with only 9.6 billion compared to 12 billion in the earlier estimates. And when you have this many billion people on Earth, many fewer people means that much less pressure creating climate change. Also, one more thing. The carbon footprint of every American on average goes down by 1% a year as we get better, more efficient technology. So, each person having.
Just really quickly, along those same lines, this is going to be more of a question and everything, Dr. Zetz and everything. But one of the things that I know that you've been part of is that you had another book that you wrote as well, which is kind of what you are alluding to and what even Rick has been alluding to, which is the art and craft of problem solving. And I'm sometimes of the opinion that not enough of us know how to do enough problem solving. And you were actually a member and won the USA Mathematical Olympiad. I didn't even know we had a mathematical.
No. I have to reveal that is another Dr. Paul Seitz.
Okay.
He's a PhD. I'm a physician by training, and he's a professor of mathematics at the University of California, San Francisco. So
cool.
I have met him through email, but I am not him, and I am not a mathematician. So
cool. I'm glad we clarified that because, like I said, it can be interesting when you do the research because there can be folks that have the same name and all along those lines.
Yeah.
I can tell you those guys, the other Zeitz, he did acquire his skill through both talent and insane amount of practicing. The Math Olympiad people, they do hours of training and study a day for years, starting in, I don't know, probably 9th, 10th grade, maybe earlier. That's a tough field.
Yeah, it's a very tough field and everything. But what are some of those 7 principles? Because like you said, we talked about them to some degree, and you kind of went through them quickly. But what are some of the 7 principles to being a love-centered activist? And should we all be love-centered activists? Or maybe there's some folks that can't aspire to be love-centered activists?
Well, I think that's an individual choice. I do think it's universally available for people to choose, and it could apply to anyone that chooses. So step 1 is it's go time. It's about asking the question, how can I serve, and making commitments towards something that you're passionate about. Step 2 is self-liberation. That's the journey of self-realization and taming your inner dragon and managing your triggers. Step 3 is about accessing unified consciousness. It's about developing your ability to understand that we're part of a bigger whole, unity consciousness, and to deploy that capability as a part of how you live your life. Step 4 is called peace crafting. It's a methodology for how we relate to each other. Step 5 is called imagineering. It's about unlocking political imagination and unlocking our visions and manifesting those visions with movements. And knowing that we can't do this as individuals, we got to mobilize together in movements. Step 6 is called Sparking Peaceful Revolutions. And that step goes into the opportunity we have to do peaceful resistance, or what Reverend Martin Luther King called nonviolent resistance. And anyone can do that from their home or some of us go on the streets and do that kind of protesting in order to bring forward good trouble for the common good. And then the last step is about unifying within ourselves and unifying collectively. And it's a whole set of ideas and practices for, breaking down the barriers, the separations that keep us apart, and finding ways to build bridges and connecting us. And in that step, I really do bridge into the democracy crisis that we're facing in the United States, and globally, democracy is being threatened. And I think I'm a strong believer in authentic democracy, and I really think we have opportunities now to really fix our own democracy here at home. So that's how the book flows.
I have a question for you about shared unifying and shared consciousness and most of so technology, social media, where we're always in touch with everybody else, teens wake up every 90 minutes to check their feeds. We thought it would have positive effects, and like 10 years ago, Twitter, helped with the Green Revolution in Egypt, giving people information. How are you optimistic, it's your job to be optimistic, but how do you feel about tech, unifying or dividing us?
I mean, that's a fantastic question. I mean, I think, like you said, with social media, technologies, AI, for example, our work, and it's serious work, is about harnessing that for the common good versus allowing it to operate unbridled, if you will, doing digital harm and doing other kinds of harm. That's the problem right now with the internet and the social media spaces. The corporations who run those systems are unregulated, and they wrote the rules in Washington to keep them unregulated. And I have done work on digital violence, and I was on the Hill, and I couldn't believe the feebleness of our government in the wake of the power of Apple and Meta and these massive corporations. So it's like I come back to our democracy's not working because our government should be creating a legal framework to optimize the positive, the common good, and to protect us from the digital harm or the harm that AI could do. And it's completely feeble and broken right now, unfortunately.
But Dr. Zayt, how can we improve that? Because as I mentioned on World Edition earlier today, I watched last night and I just stumbled across it, the Flagrant podcast that Donald Trump was on. And one of the things that he talked about was what you're talking about, which is the power of the technology. He was saying that they managed to open up the, those people that had done the riots, their Apple phones, but they had apparently not opened up the Apple phones of the folks that attempted to assassinate him and all along those lines. So he was saying that Apple has more power, and there's a lot of other people that talk about the FANG corporations as well as the FANG businesses in that space. But I'm just wondering, what is your thoughts around the power of technology and some of these technocrats that are out there and how much power they have in our democracy?
Well, I mean, they have huge lobbying prowess. They have huge lobbying forces on Capitol Hill. They're basically Democrat or Republican. It's not one side or the other. This is the whole system that is being run by the corporations, and it is really disturbing. And the tech companies are super powerful right now, and I was literally on the Hill earlier this year, and the staffers are like, our hands are tied. They can't get the kind of reforms through because of the pressure from the lobbyists, from the tech companies. They just have so much money and so much power because of the way the rules of the game are. Because of the Citizens United, for example, where corporations can spend unlimited amount of money on lobbying our government. So our government is supposed to be a democracy, and it's supposed to protect the voice of the people. And there's a lot of work going on to reform how our country is operating. And I'm particularly focused on advocating for citizens' assemblies as a fourth branch of government, to bring the people's voice into our government, to institutionalize that at the state government and the federal government, so that we can have a authentic lottery, for example, pick random citizens and bring them into a learning and a deliberation process, and then they make policy recommendations that can go to a referendum or that can be considered by legislatures. And this is happening all over the world right now in other countries. So it's part of the democracy. Everyone's trying to figure out how to fix democracy because it's losing steam. And so this idea of citizens' assemblies is really, there's a big wave of it happening in the US and around the world right now.
What do you think about democracy just in general? Because you've mentioned a couple of times that it is at a serious demise, and I've heard both candidates say that if their side loses, democracy will be at an end. And I've heard that from both the Kamala Harris campaign as well as the Trump campaign. So I was just wondering your thoughts on this notion about democracy being in its waning days.
Well, I think, first of all, I want to say that the majority of Americans, 51%, are now identifying as independents. So you just named the two political parties, and they're both minorities, if you will, of the electorate. So the sad part is that half the people that are eligible to vote don't usually even vote. So people are so disenfranchised and so separate from the system as an indication of how broken it is. And this issue that Rick and I were talking about overseeing AI and regulating technology companies, the fact that that isn't happening is another sign of a failing democracy. I think that whoever wins the election, I think everyone recognizes that authoritarian rule is possible here in the United States, that we might lose the sense of democracy that we have, and that we have to really wake up to the opportunity that we have to really radically transform it. And the movement I'm working on is #UnifyUSA, and we're calling for a national citizens assembly to do constitutional renewal and transformation. We want to bring it to the people. And there is a provision in the Constitution that allows for citizens to organize themselves peacefully to fix the system instead of or transform the system, because it's a broken system. It's 250 years old, and we're using a playbook from the 1700s. Now, if you needed surgery, and I said I'm going to use the approaches from the 1700s, you would run as fast as you could.
Yep, that makes
we have to
sense.
modernize and update ourselves. Yeah.
So there's another guy on this network, David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the U.S. He wants to do the same thing for an entirely different, well, not entirely, but he thinks the budget is broken, that we need constitutional reform because neither candidate, neither party has any idea how to spend less than we bring in.
Yeah, that's a good point and everything. I don't know.
I agree with that.
I'm sure that there are people at Project 2025 who want to have a constitutional convention for reasons that would make us very nervous.
That's probably true and everything. But just really quickly, Dr. Zeitz and everything in that space, and Jacoby and Sasha may have questions as well. You mentioned earlier this notion of love-centered activism, and you definitely brought up the idea of Dr. King and even Mr. Lewis and everything along those lines and in that space. But I was just wondering, can you give examples where there has been modern day changes without folks going into that conflict mindset? I mean, we're looking at the Middle East, it's very conflict oriented. There's definitely bombs flying on both sides. And if you even look at Ukraine and Russia, there is definitely Russia unfairly invaded and definitely did it in a very unfair and unjustified and uncivilized kind of way. And Ukraine held their own and is now fighting back and has been fighting back for a long time. But both of those are conflicts that a lot of lives are being lost. And I'm just trying to figure out if you can give an example of a peaceful resolution that is taking place in the world where some people are doing like the Gandhi or MLK kind of ways of change.
Well, I was going to say the Gandhi and the MLK things. So those are recent examples. There have been revolutions in countries in Africa where people have risen and transcended a violent situation with a peaceful transition. I think South Africa, for example, went through decades of violence and even violent resistance from the ANC. And that ended up leading to a peaceful transition when Mandela was freed. And they have one of the best constitutions in the world right now, at least on paper, for giving rights and equality to all. So I think that there are those kinds of examples, right now. In terms of the work that I'm doing now on citizens' assemblies, which I think is the pathway for healing our democracy. There are great examples. In Ireland, for example, they had citizens' assemblies that led to mandatory national referendums, and they were able to successfully approve transformative policies. Belgium, for example, has a institutionalized citizens' assembly where it has the power to identify priorities and force the legislature to take on policy matters. So it's giving voice to the people. So instead of, this was in a country where their constitution broke down completely. They couldn't have an elected government functioning, kind of like what we have. And they decided that a citizens' assembly was the best way forward on that.
Sasha, in some ways, and you may have some questions as well, this almost seems to be going opposite of some of the things that you've been talking about, because I know on the network you've been talking about the notion of us going back to martial law and the winner being the person that actually gets to set the rules, and all along those lines. I'm kind of paraphrasing you, but if you want to ask a question, and maybe you might want to put it in your own context, because I did kind of paraphrase your words. But Sasha.
Thank you. Dr. Zeiss, it's a great pleasure to have you here. And I'd like to mention that I don't want to rain on your parade, but I'm somewhat skeptical about your idea of revolutionary optimism and National Assembly. Because when you mention examples of Belgium and Ireland and a few others, they're relatively small countries. And they're in some ways homogeneous population regarding language, religion, and culture, and maybe many other traits. In the United States, what is in common between people in North Dakota and Texas, or Oregon and Florida? There's nothing in common, nothing at all, period. It's funny that, yeah, they're all citizens of the United States, or at least they reside in the United States. Some of them may not be even citizens, but there is no common ground at all. My idea was of creating common ground. It's coming from my experience of being brought up in Soviet Union. I was born in Ukraine. And at that time, it was mandatory military service. And we lived in the same barracks. For example, I myself from Ukraine, and somebody else from Uzbekistan, and somebody else from Far East, and so on. And for 2 years, while doing your service, you mingle with these people and you learn a little bit about their culture, their motivations, and what they're like, and they're learning about you and so on. And it's not perfect solution in many ways, but at least the people who were in an army for 2 years, and they would meet, say, 10 years later, and they would be very interested in each other. How's your life and what you've done, and so on. There would be a common ground of people living in various places around the huge country, which was at that time Soviet Union. Now, speaking about your peaceful aspirations, let's see if you'll take the war between Russia and Ukraine, or Middle East for the same purposes. I'll tell you, it's in the Bible. It's a time for peace. It's a time for war. Right now, both in Ukraine-Russia conflict or war and the Middle East, it's a time for war. And you know what? The best examples of war being successful, when one side decisively beats another side, and another side is unconditionally surrenders. You can talk about Germany in 1945, you can talk about Japan, and you can talk about First World War and many, many other through history, if you will go all the way. Now, those wars that there was a conflict and there was some kind of a peaceful resolution and so on, that peace never lasted long enough. They would go their own way for a period of time, and they would come, at least one of the side, which would be prepared better than the other one, that would resume the war. And it's all, except that now it's even more dangerous, because both sides would be better prepared and they would fighting even more resolutely. So the best achievable result of any war, at least these two that I mentioned, is one side has to decisively win against the other side. That's all my input. Thank you so much.
What's your thoughts around that, Dr. Zetz? And in that same space and everything, I was, like I said, I was part of the social work conference earlier, and the guy was talking about quantum thinking, and he was talking about how the million, billion, and trillion look alike, but if you have to break down how much that is, it's a very much a mind stretching. The fact that those are big numbers, but they are, when you think about their quantity, they are not on equal playing field because of the amount of money that each one takes and all along those lines. But he also talked about this notion of empire versus like a true empire and everything, because he mentioned Napoleon versus the Chinese kind of empires. And part of that, I think, is generational knowledge and everything, because apparently, even though a lot of people give Napoleon credit for being this great empire, that empire only lasted, I think he said, somewhere between 11 to 14 years, whereas the Ming Dynasty lasted about 789. And part of that was the fact that they were training their people to keep that dynasty going, whereas Napoleon did not necessarily do that. But I just wanted your take on, is this something that we need to train our people at on a consistent basis?
Yeah, so I'm going to try to respond and weave Sasha and your comments, because I think, I think what's happening here is that the United States is a military-industrial empire. We spend more money than many other militaries combined. We have hundreds of 750 military bases around the world, and in many ways, we're behind these conflicts that Sasha was talking about. And we're funding them too. And I'm not saying naively that there aren't opposing forces or evil forces that we have to be vigilant about, but we haven't invested in sustainable development and peace assistance in any significant way. And again, it's the same thing that I said earlier. Our government is controlled by these corporations that are making all the money by this military-industrial complex. So our system of government has been captured by the military-industrial complex. And also, everyone should know that the Pentagon is the #1 carbon emitter on the planet. So it is the greatest carbon producer on the planet. And so all these issues that I'm describing are interrelated. So I'm saying, give us a half of a wing of one of your planes. Invest in civic infrastructure, invest in citizens' assemblies, and get the voice of the people. And I believe that there is a movement in the United States that is. I don't think that we're so different, Sasha, as we might have been in the past. The inner nature of our society has evolved, and the military connections, the traveling connections, the sports connections. There is a weaving of our society. And now Democrats and Republicans are working together under organizations like Braver Angels and the Listening Project and the More Perfect Union. There's 20,000 organizations right now active in the United States that are working on strengthening our democracy and bridging the divide between left and right. And what they have found is that most Americans agree on most issues 80% of the time. We can solve the problems that we have if we are allowed to, but the system is controlled by these other forces that aren't allowing us to generate the solutions that most Americans, as varied as we are, there is a potential for consensus and common sense solutions for many of these problems. That's the reality, in my view.
I would like to mention a few things. About Maslow's pyramid, and at the bottom of the pyramid is the needs of people, which is space to live, the accommodation, the food.
You're talking about Malthusian?
Yeah, and from that point on, most of Americans, half of Americans, they don't even have $400 cash needed for a rainy day. They just don't have it. They live day by day. So for them, we're talking about 50% of Americans, the #1 is to buy food. The moment that they spend on food extra $10 a month, they are freaking in panic. They don't know what to do, how to live, or so on. And I'm not talking about the average blue shirt workers. I'm talking about university professors just as well. Now I'm talking about a situation where the price of gas would go up 5 cents, they would scream, look at what's doing, 5 cents. They can't think beyond these necessities.
Right, they're in survival mode, yeah.
That's survival for most of Americans, 50% at least, it's a survival. Those a little bit beyond 50%, they still want to do a little bit better financially. And that's all what they care. And it doesn't matter, even if its economy is doing so well like now. Well, look at the stock market, it's climbing every day in new records. Look at the inflation, came down today to 2.2%. Doesn't matter, they still spent extra 75 cents for groceries, and they will be bitching around it and talk to their neighbors about it. They will discuss that, not all the wonderful ideas about the citizens coalitions and they're doing this or that. No, 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 no. I
I hear
hate
what
to
you're saying,
see
Sasha, but
when you were tailing them and people either they already left a long time ago and don't listen to our program, or they're wondering what is he talking about? What
but
is all
Sasha,
that?
along those same lines and everything, and I just wondering Dr. Setz's thoughts around this. There's a number of people that will have this notion that because you kind of mentioned the industrial military complex and everything, that war and prisons are good business and everything because there are a lot of for-profit prisons. There are a lot of just like there are for-profit hospitals, and I know that a lot of times even Sasha had brought it up that the creation of weapons is actually creating jobs here in the United States when we are building these weapons that we're then sending to Ukraine so they can defend themselves against Russia. And that was part of the argument, from my understanding of history, around World War One and World War Two, because we in one of those wars we were in the middle of a Great Depression, so they were feeling that the war and the war machine could actually get us in a better economic situation. I mean, it cost a lot of
Great.
lives, and it
Okay.
wasn't great.
Mark, thank you. Come down to earth. The industrial military complex is bogus in its nature. Besides that they're spending almost $1 trillion a year, they have nothing to show for it because most of the weapons that Ukraine needs right now, the military complex, this wonderful, great military complex, simply doesn't have it. They don't have it available because for the last 30 years since the fall of the Soviet Union, they were playing in a wonderful game, the end of history, oh, it's now so nice, while Russia were building its arsenal, getting on its side all these clowns like North Korea and Iran, soon to be in the past, and all that stuff. And look at now, Russia is they're fighting incredibly stupid wars. They're losing 1,200 people a day, but they're making progress. 500 meters one day and 600 meters another day. It took them 8 months actually to get from a little village of Avdiivka to Vuhledar, a little town that they just got a couple of days ago. And Ukraine actually captured a good chunk of Kursk territory in Russia, and Russia cannot do anything about it. Russia doesn't have a proper air defense system, so Ukrainian drones are coming and destroying Russian military bases, the refineries, oil refineries, and Putin is asking Biden to listen, do something about it.
So you mentioned prisons privately run. The number of privately run prisons in the U.S. is declining. I don't know why, but the number of privately run hospital chains run by private equity, that's a huge problem because those companies, they do not give an F about patients. They care about maximizing profit, and it disproportionately hits people in rural areas where they've only got one possible hospital to go to, or maybe zero when the private equity people shut it down.
And it's not just hospitals, because it's also, like I told several people on this show, my dad is back home, but he did go to a rehab center, and a lot of those rehab centers are privately owned as well. I'm not sure if Duke's owned by, if Hillcrest is owned by Duke, or if it's privately owned. Maybe Jacoby knows that and everything, but I know that there are a number of them that are privately owned. But Jacoby, you got a question or a thought as well?
I mean, prisons started going down. I think the privatization started going down once the awareness came up, because that was a big push up under the Obama administration when people started attacking him because, oh, he's not doing anything for Black people. Newsroom came out around that same time period. People's awareness started popping up. But my question goes into, I guess, a whole encompassing notion of the conversation. Because while these entities own and navigate and do a lot of these things, and they're ignoring AI, the issues with AI, they're ignoring technology and all the advancements in technology from quantum computing on, all the things that will come about from these problems. And also, since it is a double-edged sword, all the advancements in research that would come about as well. To me, because the conversation started dipping into the idea of dropping bombs and all the other stuff, and we're still talking about the old ideas, the old wars, the old the individuals in Congress that are still holding fealty to the same individuals that have controlled Congress for decades on decades on decades. At what point do we turn that corner? How can we turn that corner and get that? And I think this election is one of those kind of tipping pieces, because the populace has gotten younger, the voting bloc has gotten younger, the people have begged for youth. At what point in society's mindset can we start jumping into the younger ideas and the view that AI has to be looked at, because that is with AI the easy thing seen as the AI movies and the AI pictures. Woo! But the hard thing seen is that Taco Bell is now using AI for orders. That's literally taking a job from somebody in the fast food industry. And if you look at how Sheetz came about, or Wawa came about, and all those self-ordering, that's AI coming down the pipe anyway. There's a canary in the coal mine that we're ignoring. How do we get there as a society? Because we still keep going back to the old idea that we got to drop bombs. We got to, just as he said, we got to order more planes. If you take part of that plane, we can invest in all this lower education stuff to help people. How do we get out of that?
Dr. Zetson, I think that question was directed to you, but I can add a kind of a caveat to that as well. Do you think that the young people are doing a better job of understanding what you want to be part of, which is the love-centered activism and everything, or is it something that they get maybe better than those of us that are in our 50s and 60s get? So I was wondering, do you feel that the young people understand what you are doing better than some of our older folks?
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, I'm with Jatovi on this, and I think that I'm asking that same question. Like, what is the tipping point going to be? I believe that we may be approaching it. We're going to have an election on November 5th. It's going to be a contested election. There could be political violence. There could be uncertainty about the outcome of the election in January or beyond. I don't know yet. But there could be a flashpoint when people say enough is enough. And instead of us having to be trapped and living under this broken system, let's join forces and co-create a new system together for the future that is that is people-centered. So bringing the voice of the people back into our democracy for real, not fake the way it is now. And we have a way to do that through citizens' assemblies. It's a tried and true method, and we just have to decide to bring it forward now. It's a pathway for us to transform ourselves. I'm going to be participating later this month in Washington on a citizens' assembly on youth mental health. So I'm working with young people right away on this methodology to solve problems that they're feeling in their own lives right now. But at the country and state level, it's dealt with societal problems like elections and constitutions and the climate emergency. So it has the potential to be a pathway for recreating our democracy.
And along the same lines and everything, today is actually Mental Health Awareness Day. I actually learned that earlier today as well. So how do you think we as a society, both nationally and globally, are doing it, understanding the importance of mental health? Because you mentioned that you're going to be going to do this event later on this weekend.
Yeah. I mean, our whole it's evolving rapidly right now. Fortunately, I think most of our healthcare system was focused on curative disease response, and it was again corporate driven, pharmaceutical driven, and technology driven companies forcing us into a curative healthcare system. And I think mental health is something that requires prevention and a different focus. It has to focus on human well-being and human flourishing, and it has to start young. And so I think things are shifting. People recognize that our modern society, our addiction to technology is harming our young people, and they're suffering greatly from it. And we can do better. I strongly believe we can do better. We can recreate our whole system. Instead of a curative system, we could create it in a well-being system, throughout the life cycle from birth till death. And we could save money, and we could recreate how we operate our whole health response. We would include prevention on equal weight. We would include mental health, preventing mental health problems as a top investment priority, rather than trying to solve it after it happens.
So I want to briefly talk about AI's mental health. AI doesn't know anything, it can't think, but it will be able to in the future. But if you talk to AI now, it behaves as if it can think and as if it's conscious, because it's been trained on the output of humans who are all conscious. So AI sucks that up. Also, if you let a bunch of racists plug stuff into AI will be racist. If you let a bunch of horny creeps plug in, AI gets started. So we can control, if we're not idiots about it, maybe what AI's values are as it grows up. Right. And eventually it'll overtake us in thinking ability. And when that happens, we want it to agree with us about the value of preserving life and order.
Exactly. And there is work going on that front, Rick. I mean, the president did launch a major AI initiative, every department across the government. The problem is there's no regulatory framework nationally or globally. And this is a global phenomenon, right? AI is being developed in China and Russia and in Iran, everywhere. So there has to be a global regulatory framework, but that has to be part of a peaceful revolution, right? Because right now we're dealing with violent revolutions and violence and war and breakdown and separation. Like, that's what I believe, that we're on the cut. We have the potential, and that I am a revolutionary optimist, so bear with me. The peaceful revolution that I'm imagining for here in the United States, it actually has to happen globally, because this whole system of extraction and violence is a global phenomenon right now. It's been globalized, and it's taking us down the cliff to our ultimate self-elimination and self-destruction. So we have a choice as humanity at this moment, and we have pathways for creating a peaceful coexistence, and that's what I'm inviting you all and others to join forces on.
Now, what
I'm telling you, you have to be prepared. If you want a peaceful coexistence, you have to be prepared to lie down under Mr. Putin and other thugs and tell him, oh, please, no war, no, we're okay. Oh, you want to take Ukraine? Take it, it's all yours. Oh, you want to take a little bit piece of Alaska or all of it? Just take it, we don't need it. Oh, you want to take also Brighton Beach in New York? Okay, you can do well without Brighton Beach. It's better than to have a thermonuclear war. So, okay, take it, this and this and that, lie down, and that's all what there is to it. Period. And Putin is blackmailing all world with his stupid weapons, which probably are not even working. But it works, because Ukraine is deprived of its ability to strike Russian targets, and it's almost like you tie up one hand behind its back, and it can fight only with one hand. Well, Russia is using all their own weapons and those from North Korea and Iran and so on. So be realistic. Don't try to impose the idea of peaceful coexistence. It's so nice. Let's be friends or so on. No, we will not be ever friends with Mr. Putin and all his team of thugs, which is North Korea and others.
So I just want to say just a quick thing. The idea of a utopian society where everyone is peaceful isn't possible, but there is an idea where everything is peaceful. There's a difference between the two, because you're not going to have everybody kissing everybody's behind and sweeting everything. That's impossible.
No.
What you can have is people shaking hands and living respectfully beside each other, regardless of their disagreements. A gun and a bomb doesn't have to be fired every time. When you
Right.
play chess, you're not going to attack the person or punch the person in the face just to make a move. No, you legitimately make a move and respect the person in front of you. It's the same thing. So my thing and my question, or I guess since we're close to the end of the hour, my homework for you, Doc, because I think this would be fun. It would be a fun little thing. It would be a fun book, because everybody knows the book, Women Are From Venus, Men Are From Mars, or Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. Everybody knows about love languages and stuff like that. I think one of our problems, because right now I'm working on a major project to happen in Durham, to kind of around this similar thing that you're working on and have dedicated things to, or dedicated your life to on, because I think there is a disconnect. There's a disconnect between the youth and the adults.
Yeah.
And the adults have made everything the youth are using as stress relief, mental health pieces, ways that they can communicate with each other. They've made a lot of those things as they're bad for you. I never did it, so they're bad for you now. But when those adults or those parents jump into the world of that child, they can understand, okay, now I understand. Now I can see where you're doing that. And I would think it would be kind of a fun book to read, and a very neat thing to learn about is how far that divide is, and what that language is about. Because again, we spent most of the show talking about old time wars and old time things. However, we want to improve the future, but we're steadily speaking in an old time language that maybe that youth doesn't even understand. And that youth is probably reaching out in ways that we don't understand. For example, a lot of COVID, for example, a lot of individuals that made it through COVID with less mental stress, especially kids, were kids that were playing online video games. It's a social thing. But we demonize these games as something bad for them. Why not speak in that language of, okay, let's figure out a way to make it positive for you. And that game isn't something evil. It's just like if you drink a lot of water, you're going to die. But hey, water's not evil. Water's a necessity. It seems like this game itself is something that can be positive and a tool. Or social media, yes, it is. It has its problems, and it causes depression in kids and everything else. But how can we turn that? Because kids are going to use it, and us fighting against it only makes them use it more. That's where rock and roll came from. We hated it. We would listen to rock and roll. We would listen to rap. It was death music. Dungeons and Dragons created demons in your mind. Dungeons and Dragons is still one of the biggest games in the world. So it's like, how do we speak in that language of those generations to be able to communicate these things to move forward? And I think that would be a fun kind of read, or find a fascinating thing to understand.
Just really quick, any thoughts on that, Dr. Zetson? He's right. We only got about a.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great concept. I'm a strong advocate for intergenerational movement building. I do feel like we need to engage young people in their worldview and in their truth. And while us older folks have our own experience, our own wisdom, we can't figure all this out. And so I strongly believe in intergenerational spaces and intergenerational movement building, so that we can take to figure out what would really work. Because I think all humans, or most humans, do have an aspiration for peaceful coexistence and for human flourishing and well-being. And so, like, how do we tap into all that wisdom from all the generations? But it is a language thing.
Excuse me, you need real men. You have to admit, real men are those who serve in the army, those who know how to fight, those who know how to take out the girl, those who have life experience. All this today, youngsters, the garbage, absolute human garbage. They are impotent, they are immature, they are good for nothing idiots. You need real men to build a real country. If you don't have real men, you have no country.
Well, just really quick on that note, I don't know if you got any thoughts.
Get off my lawn, comment.
As we're heading out the door and everything was about nationalism and all along those lines, but I don't know if you got.
I appreciate everyone's perspectives. Thank you for sharing them.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was a great conversation, and we're going to get on out of here because it's time to get the Coco show and all along those lines. But I appreciate you being on here, Dr. Izzet, and hopefully we can get you back on. And again, you've been on a couple of times and everything, but if you want to just share once again the title of your book, where people can get the book, and how they can reach you if they've enjoyed this conversation we've had, and then I'll hit.
Yeah, thank you so much. The book is Revolutionary Optimism: 7 Steps for Living as a Love-Centered Activist. It's available on Amazon.com, or that's the best place to buy it right now. You can also go to my website, drpaulzeitz.org, to learn more about me and the movements that I'm working on.
Sounds good. And on that note, we're getting ready to get on out of here. Like I said, Coco show is getting ready to start, and then we've got other shows on the network as well. But I'll see the rest of this team on World Edition in the morning. But do appreciate you being on, Dr. Izzet. Like I said,
thanks, Mark. Thanks, Toby. Peace.
Thanks.